Hello and welcome to episode 23 of Escape the J-Curve. I can't believe how fast we are publishing and how many interesting guests we have been able to bring to our show. Today is another very special episode because we interview somebody called Jishnu Dasgupta. I know Jishnu for about 4 to 5 years now, and I've always been impressed with the speed with which he learns a new skill and he becomes excellent at a particular thing very quickly. And he has done a lot of things. He's a multifaceted person. He trained to be an architect. He has been a musician, especially a jazz guitarist, since the age of 13. And he's also dabbled with internet marketing and SEO consulting. And today we find out how he's able to master these skills so fast. We do a deep dive into his mindsets and his work ethic that has helped him immensely in getting those skills down really fast. Listen, it's a long interview with him, about almost 1.5 hours, but I am going to be publishing these interviews in 3 parts so that it's consistent and it's easy to consume. In this particular episode, we are going to talk about the path to mastery and burning bridges. So stay tuned, enjoy this episode, there's plenty to learn from. You're live. Welcome to Escape the J-Curve.
All right. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. This is really great. I think we've known each other on and off for a couple of years, and there are a lot of talented people in our field of acquaintances. So this was probably a natural next step to just start exposing all the things that we talk about, between ourselves. That's a really great idea. I really love this.
Yeah, actually, I've known you, I think, for 4 or 5 years, and I've always been in awe of how quickly you learn things and excel at certain things. So I believe there is a lot of value to be had for people who are listening in. They can learn a lot from you. So let me give you a quick context. So I know Jishnu for about, I think, 4 or 5 years now. And we have been through a few things. And as I told you that I've always been very impressed and in awe of whatever he does. And as far as I know, he has had different careers. He started off, I think he was trained as an architect. Then he completely changed his career and became a musician. And he also is an internet marketer and an SEO consultant. So does that sum you up, Jishnu?
Well, some of it, yes. There's also a few different things along the way. I mean, I think music is something that I started out with. And the main thing I would say that whatever we're going to be talking about today, kind of for me, the way this would actually be a useful talk for all the people listening is that I think there's a certain condition that, let's say, young Indian professionals are face today, where by most of us, some of us are luckier than others. Most of us, when we get out of college, let's say, for example, or when you're 18 to 21, 22, you don't really have an idea of what you want to do. Maybe even if you're good at something. For example, in my case, I started playing music when I was 13. I did my first professional gig when I was 16.
Wow.
And so I was already pretty good at it. However, I'm talking about 2007, 2008. So we're talking pre-social media and all these things. So there was really no avenues in which, and the other thing about kind of growing up here, which I'm sure you'll relate to, is the constant misinformation that you'll keep getting socially, the social feedback you keep getting. And that kind of tends to push you in a certain direction where you're like, okay, go to college, get a job, be stable, die. That's pretty much that kind of sums it up. And that's basically the social script that, especially, I'm talking about an Indian context. I can't really talk about any other. And I see that being, yeah, I mean, people talk about how things are different now, but I think there's an underlying current of that which is still very, very strong. And what it basically does is it takes somebody who has a lot of drive, who has, let's say, a lot of ambition, and it puts them in a spot where the only thing that they feel throughout their 20s, as they, let's say, they perform to the best of their abilities, and the only thing they can feel is this weird sense of, I don't know if I should be doing this. That's like the dominant emotion of your, mid 20s. I don't know if you can relate to that. I'm sure you can.
Yes, I can.
And for me, a lot of what I did was basically I was extremely impulsive. So whenever I felt that, I tried to do something about it. For example, so I was a musician. Now, then I went to architecture college.
Before we move forward, let's unpack this a little bit. So you said you started music at the age of 13.
Yes, yes.
So were you that self-aware at the age of 13 about how society pushes us into careers which are safe, and that's why you wanted to rebel against it? Or you
No, I wanted to rebel because that's what you do when you're a teenager in most cases. And for me, I think that never stopped, unfortunately. I mean, I talked to my dad about this, and basically recently, and for some people they kind of stop and they mature, and I was like, I don't think that's going to happen for me. And for me, I think I started music because, again, it was that feeling of like not feeling very unmoored. And once I started doing music and I realized that this was something I was interested in, I don't think I was particularly talented. Okay. However, what I did find in music, even in my teens, and I did realize this then, I didn't know how to articulate it, was that I found like a channel which was, it was outside of, when I was practicing music, I didn't have to think about, how is this going to reflect? How is this going to, turn out in terms of what I want to do for college or what I want to do as a job? Because it's almost like a very meditative space. That's what I've always used music as. So I still practice every day. Like people ask me how I'm able to practice every day, but the reason I'm able to do it is because it's a meditative thing for me. For me, it's like sitting down and meditating, literally. So what it does, I think, the reason that I want to unpack this, as you said, is because finding that mastery project. What is a mastery project? A mastery project is something that you do where there is actually no end. And that's very important, because most things that you'll do in life, right? Most things that you're going to do, there's going to be a kind of, a deadline or there are these specific events that you're gunning for. As a musician, I mean, you can be gunning for like these external events like, I did this show and whatever. But in terms of your craft, working on your craft, there's no end point, because, there's really no end point. Because you can keep working on it. And what it does is actually changes the way your brain works. It makes you really focus on process. It makes you very, very process oriented.
Not the outcome. Yep.
Not the outcome. And that doesn't mean the outcome is not important, but you need to, I think everybody needs to have at least one thing that they do, which is extremely process oriented, and that's what builds the focus. That's what builds your tenacity. That's what builds the ability to learn. And I think when people don't have that, it's very, very, it's like an anchor. Having something like that is an anchor, because, for example, no matter what I'm doing in my life, like, for example, I'll tell you the kind of work that I've done. Okay. I worked as an architect in a corporate firm. I worked as an architect in even these small boutique architect firms, because that's right after I graduated. I worked in a construction job as a construction supervisor. I worked as in audio electronics design. In fact, my first attempt at entrepreneurship, where I wanted to get out of architecture and into music, and I realized, hey, I want to find a foothold in music. So one thing that I was good at was, I was really good at, like, I'm a guitar player essentially, so really good at repairing and tweaking my own equipment. And I was like, okay, this is just one step from here to actually making my own. And I started making my own, and I sold a few, and I actually got a consultancy with a company that wanted to produce them. This was when I was 22. And as an audio electronics basically designer with having like zero background in it. And I've done that for a while. But in doing all of that, I don't think there are very few days where I've missed practice, you know, and there are
That's
very few
brilliant.
days where I missed it. And for me, that is actually what I focus on a lot. I focus on basic things like, okay, am I doing this particular thing? Am I focused on executing that process properly? And what I notice is that the things around it tend to fall into place the more that you're able to focus on it.
Absolutely. So you went into very deep and interesting topic here, which I wanted to add my 2 cents on. So the thing that you're talking about is life mastery, and we see this in a lot of cases around the world where people are suffering from a lack of meaning in their lives, and that's because they're following the societal script on what to do, and after a point, it doesn't nourish their souls. But whenever you read someone who is very successful, or you hear them speak, they have a goal which is bigger than themselves. They would take their entire lives to achieve that goal, and they keep at it every day. They keep working on that goal. For example, Elon Musk wants to make humanity a interplanetary species, and probably he knows that it cannot be done within his lifetime, but he keeps at it anyway. So it gives him a purpose or meaning to his life, and it doesn't end when he's 35 or 40 or 45. So when you check society's boxes like get a job, get a house, get married, get kids, you're probably done at the age of 45, let's say. Then there is a sort of meaninglessness to life that creeps in if you don't have something that you're creating or working towards. So I think that's a very deep and important topic that you picked up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to develop that a little bit. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because especially, let's say, growing up in contemporary India, what you must have noticed as well is that at the surface level, I mean, there are a lot of surface level changes.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of, it looks like, wow, like there's all these things, all these avenues open to us. But if you kind of dig under the surface, everybody's still kind of battling the same issues. Everybody's battling the same ennui and the same kind of lack of purpose, and that same feeling of just being unmoored and not knowing exactly what to do. And that, I mean, with that, I'm actually kind of segue into kind of talking a little bit about my own experiments with not knowing on what to do.
Yes, please.
And I think there are a few things which might be very instructive. Where the first thing I realized as a musician, now there are, it was unfortunate for me that the kind of music I got really interested in is also, it was jazz, and jazz is literally, I mean, it is so unprofitable that it is literally, I mean, there are quotes around it, like people quote like there's no money in jazz. That's literally like a mainstream quote, and. So clearly profit motive was not exactly my reason for getting into this. So one thing I started realizing in my teens was that, so I did all the usual things that the musicians do. I had bands and all these things. And then I started in my late teens and early 20s, just before graduating. I was still in college then. And I was pretty good in college, but I was not, I couldn't see myself doing this for the next 60 years. Let's put it that way. And one thing I started realizing is that I gotta figure something out. And I think most people have that realization, like when they're finishing off their college years, and they have that realization. It's like, okay, do I really want to do this? Like, is this what I really want to do? And I think what tends to happen is that we tend to anesthetize and kind of medicate that problem away. Where what we'll do is we'll look at everybody else and be like, well, everybody else is in the same boat. So you know what? It's not a big deal.
We're doing the right thing.
Yeah, we're doing the right thing. And there's no lack of people telling you that you're doing the right thing.
Do you know about the Ash experiment, for example? Where so they draw 2 lines of different lengths on a board. And people are saying,
Oh, yes. It's that experiment that tells you about length. Social proof, right? Like when somebody else says that they're the same length. Exactly. So it's just this whole thing of sheep being led to the slaughter kind of situation. And what happens is the people who do well in systems like that are people who are they're not necessarily good performers. They're just people who are compliant, right?
Yeah.
And so you end up growing up in a system where you're rewarded for being compliant.
Yeah.
So what does that do to you? How does that like mess you up later in life when you actually have to make your own decisions about things? So it's really, really kind of dicey. I don't necessarily have an answer for that, but like how can we fix that? I don't know, but there are some very, very deep problems in this. Now, when I was about to graduate from college, I realized, hey, what I see around myself mostly. I was lucky to be mentored by some really amazing musicians, right?
Wow.
And so what I used to do, funnily enough, was when I was like, again, as I said, I wasn't like the most talented musician or anything. So what I used to do is I used to go to all these gigs in Bangalore, all these shows where all these really good musicians were, and I would just basically try to hang around there and try to meet them. That was and not meet them as a fan, but then just try to keep meeting them and keep basically badgering them, because what I realized was that it wasn't about the show. I needed to see how these guys actually lived, right? I needed to see how they practice their craft, because that's where the real problems were. So as a result, I kind of got in touch with, and I was mentored, not mentored officially, but when I say mentored, I basically said I used to hang around these people and badger them, and eventually they kind of warmed to you when they realized that okay, this guy's he's serious about it, right? So I think people really that's the interesting thing to point out as well when people are looking for mentorship. If you want to find a good mentor, you don't have to be the best in terms of your skill set. You just have to be really dedicated. That's all. Yeah. So I got some really good mentors, and what I realized was that the path that I was going in with this 5 years of architecture school and all that was not going to lead to a career in music. Additionally, I realized that whatever plans I had for jazz were most likely to fail. Now, that's a really not a nice realization to have when you're like 21, 22 years old, right? So was that, okay, there's the high probability of what I'm thinking of doing, what I want to do, probably is going to fail. So I started looking at different footholds in the music industry at that point of time, and I knew precious little. So I said, okay, what are my skill sets? I know how to play guitar.
Yep.
I know how to, I know how to fix all my guitars and my amplifiers and stuff. Okay, let me start making amplifiers. With that, I would say that that brings me to my next point, which is you have to be suitably reckless. You have to have a certain amount of recklessness, and to do that, because that's not a mentally sound decision to make. It's like, okay, I have no training in this. Let me do this for a living, and. But funnily enough, I started making these things, and I started making like amplifier prototypes. I basically learned analog audio electronics on the fly as I was making it, literally. And it got picked up by a company in Bangalore who wanted to start their own, who wanted to start production. So they brought me on as a consultant. This was before I graduated, right? Okay. And it was exciting for me. That was my first business experience, where I got to hang out with people who were doing a startup,
How old were you then? About
I was 21, 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was my first business experience. Before that, I'd actually worked. I'd done internships at different architecture firms, and this was completely different. And I think that was my first taste of, wow, this is what it feels like to be a decision maker. Instead of actually going to work and you, instead of the parameters of your life being this 9 to 5, this clock that you punch in and punch out like a factory worker, to actually be more in a decision role, and so I kind of worked with them for a little while. Of course, that didn't really work out for many, many reasons. There were some investing, funding related reasons. And that's where I got the second lesson, is that most of your projects will fail initially. And so, that from that consultancy thing, I was kind of left without a plan B. I didn't have a plan B. So I just, and this was in 2013. And so I just started, okay, fine, let me get a job. So I got my first, I got a job at a construction site. I got a job as an architect, but then that became essentially a construction job, and that, I think, if you remember, or if the guys or the people who are listening to this, if once you graduate college and you have that first job that you do, That's when you really get a taste of what like dissatisfaction, like what metaphysical like dissatisfaction really means, at an existential sense. That's I
Sounds
think
about right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the first job experience, right? That's basically, it teaches you how to be dissatisfied with life. And in many ways, okay, I was lucky in the sense that a construction job is very, very involved.
Hands-on. Yeah.
It's very hands-on, so that was pretty great. However, it was exhausting. I was living in Delhi at the time, and this is the other problem that most like people who want to be entrepreneurs and want to start the business is that there's not enough hours in the day. Especially when you're doing your day job, and like you slog it out for 12 hours and you commute for another 2, and then you go home and you really have to now you have to sit and work on your business. Oh my God, right? That's a huge problem. And for me, the problem was actually to keep my practice schedule going as I was working in this job. And what I did was, because I'd been practicing so consistently, I kept practicing throughout this thing. So I'd work this construction thing, and then I'd travel back home, and then I'd basically stay up till 4 a.m. practicing. And the reason I mention this is because the first few years, let's say if you want to start your own business, if you want to start your own, again, these are fundamentals. If you want to start your own project, the first few years are going to be absolute and utter hell. In most cases, if you're lucky, maybe not, but it's good to assume that it will be hell. And when you do something like that, when you have a day job and then you still kind of force yourself to have the discipline to, let's say, do something like practice, if you just replace the word practice with work on your project, you understand that it's largely the thing is cultivating that discipline. You have to be able to endure those first few years where, let's say, you're working a day job, and you have to kind of make sure that you stick to the program. That you go home and resist the temptation to kind of just unwind, resist the temptation to do those things. And that is where I think, if we talk about failure models, I think being cognizant of how people fail is a very, very good indicator. And that is probably the first step where people fail. People who have really good intentions for maybe building a business, have great ideas maybe, but then the problem is they're not able to get enough momentum because maybe they have this day job that they can't quit yet. And maybe they have this assumption that they have to quit their day job before they can start working on something. That's not true at all.
Sure. So just a quick question here. So there's a idea in self-help that you have to burn all your bridges. So basically what it means is, if you want to start your business or your passion project, you have to let go of everything else that you're doing. So what you're saying is that you are not a very good, so you wouldn't suggest people leave their day jobs and focus all in their businesses or their passion projects in the first few
I've
years?
done the burning bridges as well, but I would say this, that burning the bridges sounds really, really tempting. And I think there's a time in your life where you have to burn bridges. But before burning bridges, you have to first basically develop the fortitude. Because what's going to happen if you don't develop your discipline first is you're going to burn this is what I've seen. I've seen people do this. Guys who have great business ideas. What they'll do is they're working for, let's say, an IT company or something, and they have an amazing business idea that they want to start. What they do is they quit their IT job, or they take a sabbatical for a few years or something. And then the next few years, they just
smoke weed and party.
They're dicking around. Exactly. And the reason that happens is because before you burn your bridges, you have to make sure that you have like the process orientation, and you have the first bridge that you burn is with yourself. You have to burn the bridge where that bridge of like entitlement to comfort and things like that, where you feel entitled to taking a break and all that. Those are the first bridges you burn before you do some external thing. I think that's the first thing that you do. If you want to burn a bridge, the first bridge that you burn is burn that bridge of entitlement that you have to to creature comforts, to a certain lifestyle where recreation is allowed. Because unfortunately, because you've decided to do this project, because you've decided to do this, in my case, because I've decided to make music like a part of my daily life, the first thing you have to do is you have to like accept the consequences of that, and kind of actually realistically, I think people don't talk about it enough. It's so fucking tempting to say, okay, burn your bridges and follow your dreams. Yeah, but most people, they burn their bridges and they don't have the discipline to follow their dreams. And then 3 years later, they're trying to build that bridge up again, you know, and that back to square one. So I would say, yeah, burn your bridges, but you have to be very cognizant. Ask yourself, like, am I going to actually follow through? Like, what is my, what track record do I have that I follow through on a project? You know, for me, I don't have to worry about follow through because I followed through with like music practice for, you know, almost 20 years now, you know, and I've barely made any money with it, with music, you know. So I've made some money, but not much money at all. And so I know that it's not financially motivated. I know that it's very internally motivated. I know that it's going to happen come hell or high water, you know. So you have to know that about yourself. And if you don't have that, you need to find some way to prove that to yourself, you know. So maybe a step, any kind of mastery project. Maybe it can be fitness. Maybe it can be, you know, take one element of the business project that you want to work on while you still have your day job. And let's say your business involves some amount of coding. Learn how to be a really good coder, you know, like in your free time. So get really good at following a particular process before you decide to kind of make that external decision of burning your boats or you know, going out on a limb and all this stuff that sounds so fantastic in a YouTube video.
Listen, thanks so much for listening to the episode. I really appreciate it. Now, if you think you have got any value out of this episode, please make sure to engage with the content. My podcast is available on all of the platforms like Spotify, like Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, Breaker, and it's also even available on YouTube. So if you got some value out of this content, please like, please subscribe, please leave a comment, or please download and share it with someone who would get value out of this. That's all I ask. Thank you so much.